Good afternoon, fellow ruminators. Welcome back to another session, Rumination with Andrew. Thank you so much for joining as we are about to discuss a very important topical matter. And this afternoon, we are going to look at another important and interesting topic. Andrew Holness, of course, looking for a third term in office. He says that he has done an amazing job. Andrew Holness, I deserve a third term. See the amazing job. That is what the Prime Minister is claiming, that he has done a fantastic job as Prime Minister of Jamaica. And the observer here, the government has done an amazing job, says Holness. And that is an article published today in the Jamaica Observer, June 22, 2025. Jamaica Prime Minister Dr. Andrew Holness says that the ruling Jamaica Labour Party has demonstrated its capability of fixing the country's problems. Now, these are the words of Prime Minister Dr. Andrew Holness. These conditions have been with us for a very long time. Many of these conditions that we now face in our local communities with road and water have been with us from the 1990s, Holness said Saturday night at the JLP's Clarendon Northwest constituency conference. So he's suggesting he's going back to the 1990s, but why doesn't he talk about what during the decade of the 21st century? We are 25 years in the 21st century, but I think that was his strategy of deflecting from the role and the contribution that the JLP party has played in our social and economic backwardness. I think that is what Andrew Holness is doing. At least he knows how to play that political game. Because why would he harp back to the 1990s, 30 whatever odd years ago, right? Why would he do that? But it is strategic and it works for the Prime Minister. Holness, who at the event endorsed the JLP representative in the constituency, Warren Newby, suggested that the party's fight for a third consecutive term in office or government will not be easy. He acknowledged that there has been some growing frustration among Jamaicans, but said the government has demonstrated that it can fix it. So Andrew Holness can magically fix the problems that we're having in Jamaica. I am wondering, though, having spent almost 10 years in office as the Prime Minister of Jamaica, the head of state, well, the king is the head of state, theoretically, but I'm suggesting as Prime Minister, the one who is the visible leader, the visible head of state, while the king might be theoretical, the head of state, but, in all intents, from all practical purposes, we are seeing the Prime Minister, he is the visible head of state. They're theoretical and behind the scenes, head of state is the so-called King of England, King Charles III. However, having said that, I would have expected Andrew Holness to have fixed a lot of the problems rather than patching up the problems. What I've seen you doing, Prime Minister Andrew Holness, is the patching up of many of the Jamaicans' problems, that we are putting Band-Aid on deep wounds. And hence, I am not sure if the sore is going to be healed. I think that it will be, some of the hideousness will be covered, but the sore, the festering sore, will continue to be there, right? And it needs to be healed. That wound needs to be healed. The Prime Minister cited the refurbishment of the Cornwall Regional Hospital among the infrastructural developments, and the lowering of the debt. So what he is harping on right now are infrastructural developments, such as the building of highways and of course the refurbishing of hospitals and the lowering of the debt to GDP ratio to a more than 40-year low among the gains in the economy. Now, what is that? I think that the journalists here are dumb too. Where are our financial journalists? Do we have any financial journalists in Jamaica? And do we have any political historians in our country? We're not seeing that anymore, where they are contextualizing, where the journalists who should be writing these stories, you should be having a financial journalists who should be able to contextualize what we mean by debt and the lowering of our debt and the consequences of such, and the austerity that the IMF and the World Bank the IMF particularly, has imposed rather on our country. Now, that is what a journalist should be doing, particularly one who is trained in finance. But I guess we don't have that. So Prime Minister Andrew Holness can just say whatever he wants to say without, providing the key context here, without laying the foundation. He also noted that the significant decrease in the murder rate, which is down 44% year to date, compared to the corresponding period in 2024. And we were still hearing gruesome murders, by the way. Was it last week that you had a young lady, and I think it was either her aunt or grandmother who were killed. All right, brutally slaughtered in Jamaica. Now, I don't know if Jamaicans feel that level of safety. I think that further research needs to be done in terms of, are Jamaicans largely feeling a sense of safety in the country? And what we're hearing, the data that we're seeing released from the government, the official data, can we trust those sort of information being dispensed, being disseminated to us? I think that now the journalists also need to do investigations, and they can do that by having, surveys and speaking to people and going out there in communities, community by community, to find out if Jamaicans feel a better sense of security since the death rate has gone down, the murder rate has gone down, according to Prime Minister Dr. Andrew Holness. Now listen to what the Prime Minister continues to say. We agree. We know we are working towards perfection. But if you compare it to where we were and where we are coming from, you would see that this government has done an amazing job in improving citizen security and safety in this country, said Holness. And that's the end of the article. That is how this, observer journalist was able to, he says, she says. And nothing, there's no meat given in the article, no sort of context being laid, no sort of analysis being done. And this is the Jamaica that we are talking about, that is so prosperous and where people are so smart. Yeah. Now, one of the things I must say to you here, I am not here to tell you what you want to hear. I am here to analyze the politics according to what I see. Not because I am attached, I'm tethered to a political party, because I'm not. I have never voted in my life. I've never stained my hand or my finger with any orange or green. Never. And I don't know if I never say never, but I don't think I intend to do so. Okay? I'm not interested. I'm not impressed with what I see happening in Jamaica and the level of corruption that is coming out of that country. Okay? I'm not impressed. But those of you who are impressed, good luck to you. I hope that you will not be deceived. I know better. I know that you are going to be disappointed, because one of the things that you're not looking at what is happening in the geopolitical realm, the geoeconomic also realm. You have to look at these things. These factors are going to impinge on Jamaica's performance, on Jamaica's economy. Okay? So when I say, for example, that Andrew Holness has amassed a lot of power, I am not suggesting that Andrew Holness controls what is happening in Jamaica, because he doesn't. But perception-wise, and because he is at the helm of government at this point, and whomever succeeds him, whenever they do, they will also have that perception. They will also carry that perception. But if you understand the political climate and the political landscape, you'll understand that there are forces behind Andrew Holness. And winning an election does not mean that you have won and your children have won and Jamaica has won. Okay? Right now, the United States citizens are finding out that neither party, Republican or Democrats, is vouching for them. Right? They're realizing that. So why can't we open and they are touted to be the greatest democracy, the greatest Republican state in the history of mankind. Yet Jamaicans believe that we have a democracy down there and we have freedoms and our economy is doing well when the American economy is collapsing. The American economy, the greatest, richest economy in the world, is collapsing. And when you look at what is happening in Canada also, which is a so-called first world country, their economy is collapsing. But in Jamaica, in a third world country, where many persons are seeking to run to Canada, to run to the United States, to run to all of these European countries, okay? And these people are complaining, they are crying out, they're screaming that something is fundamentally wrong with the politics and that their leaders are not running the country in the interest of the citizens. But in Jamaica, we think that our politicians are gods. And somebody told me yesterday that, oh, you think that you're God, go and vote for your God, referring to the JLP leader, Andrew Holness. But how could you even say that? How could you even think, what have I said to imply that I am a JLP supporter or even a PNP supporter? Nothing have I said to infer that. But because you're so dark and because you want to attach yourself to a political party, and if somebody else attaches him or herself to another one or is independent like I am, you're ready to kill that person. And you sense the hate coming out of Jamaica through the words that you use, the hatred, even though somebody's just reporting the news and they are just commenting on something that has been reported. All right, but you're suggesting that if you could, some of you, if you were to see me, you would kill me right there on the spot. Because this is a sort of anger that we have built up in Jamaica and the ignorance that comes out of Jamaica. And I don't know if I'm seeing this level of angst, this deep level of frustration that I'm seeing coming out of Jamaica from I'm not sure I see it in other countries. I'm not sure I see that level of aggression coming out of other countries. You can disagree with my statements by not attacking me viciously. You can say, for example, I don't agree that Andrew Holness is going to win the election, and fine. And these are the reasons. But some of you are saying you are disagreeing, but you have no evidence. In the same way you were telling me that Mark Golding is not Jamaican, but you don't have any evidence. If he's not Jamaican, show me the evidence. If you think that Andrew Holness is not going to win the next election, which is okay because nobody knows, but if others think that he is on a path to win the election based on what they're seeing, that is their right to express their opinions. Okay? But you can also express yours by giving us your analysis according to what I have seen, according to what X or Y or Z has pronounced or have pronounced. This is my view from my judgment. So I'm not sure what is happening in the educational system there, because the way how our people express themselves and the level of civility, the poor levels of comprehension, because there's nothing in my video that suggested that I am on board with Andrew Holness. But if Andrew Holness is demonstrating, is displaying some strength of character in terms of his political maneuverings and his strategies, his tactics, then I have to give him his credit. Now, let me suggest here, and let me be very clear, being a good leader and a good politician are two distinct things, right? You can be a good politician, but you're not a good leader, right? So I think Andrew Holness has mastered the art or the science, whatever you want to call it, of politics. He's been at it since the 1990s. Okay, so he would have gained some mastery of that craft. Now, being a good teacher also does not mean that you're a good educator. You might be a good teacher in the sense that you can condition your students to pass exams. But that does not mean that you are educating them. You're only helping them to pass through learning, to gain a certain body and to condition them to go and work in factories and to pass their exams. But that does not make you a good educator. Okay? And that is what, because a good educator not only teaches you the content of what you're learning, but teaches you lifelong skills and help you to be a lifelong learner. Okay? And many of the times, if you look back at what happened in your school, look back at your teachers, the ones whom you thought were nice to you and you loved them, and I'm not suggesting that there were not some good teachers who were nice and, good educators, I should say, who were friendly and amiable and generous. However, most of the teachers who were not telling you what you wanted to hear, who were not doing things that made you feel good about yourselves, these are the ones who educated you more. Okay? So Andrew Holness is suggesting here, I just wanted to say that to you to help you to understand that whenever you respond to me, you must respond respectfully. You must respond intelligently because I am intelligent and I'm not boasting. Okay? I don't like, one of the worst things you can, if you want to get me upset, is somebody who is a buffoon and pretends that he or she knows when they don't know. And so often when Christ was on the earth also, and I'm no Christ, but I'm saying that he was the God on earth, okay? And he was correcting the Jews, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and they would not listen to him because they were the intellectuals of the day, and they thought that their knowledge was the knowledge. And Christ was saying that you have no knowledge of the scriptures, even though they were educators, they were teachers, they were professors of the scriptures, but they didn't understand the scriptures. They had a theoretical knowledge, a theoretical understanding, but they were not able to merge theory with practice. Okay? And Christ was saying to them, you don't understand. You lack knowledge. You lack wisdom. You lack understanding. Okay? Now, my task here on this channel is to let you know that our political system is rigged. Okay? It's not to come to tell you that Andrew Holness is going to lead you into the land of milk and honey, or Mark G is going to lead you also into the land of milk and honey. That is their job, because their job is to convince you by providing compelling evidence that they are there to do so. But they know that they can't. Andrew Holness knows deep down that he is unable to fix Jamaica's intractable problems, particularly given our geopolitical problems. He knows that. And let me just say something, and I'm not also bragging. Okay? I am the only Jamaican podcast, Rumination with Andrew, that you'll find here that talks about geopolitics and geoeconomics. You will not hear that on Rattigan's show. You won't hear that on the other podcasts. They're just telling you about the corruption in Jamaica and the gossips here and there. And I'm not suggesting that those things don't have their place, but they have to be balanced by understanding, having a global understanding of the challenges that Jamaica faces. The US also has to understand that. They're waking up to understand also that they are a global empire. And the US is not this sovereign state unto itself that they think she is. So why are Jamaicans still clinging to politicians to solve our problems? Politicians are not there to solve your problems. You have to force them to solve your problems. And for that, you have to keep their feet to the fire. You have to be hard on them. Because if you're not hard on politicians, they are going to be hard on you by exploiting you and your children and by violating your rights. And this is what I'm here to say. Nothing else, nothing more. And I'm presenting evidence to you by just even reading the papers to let you know that this is where we are at the moment. We have spoken, for example, and Andrew Holness just spoke about it, just intimated that, we have lowered our debt, and that is one of his greatest. He lists that, among other things, as infrastructural developments and the fact that also the crime rate has gone down. He lists that as one of his major achievements, the lowering of debt. But that also has to be, just like crime and violence, has to be contextualized. And we are not contextualizing what we say. We just make open and blank statements, and people receive them uncritically without saying, how is that so? How did he achieve it? Are we better off? Okay? So when you pay down your debt and you're not investing in your hospitals, you're not investing in education, you're not investing in poverty and uplifting people out of poverty, you're not investing in industries, how are you going to grow? How are you going to grow? And these are the questions that we need to pose to the Prime Minister. Right? We can't just simply think that because it is coming from on high, it's coming from the University of the West Indies, it's coming from Jamaica's parliament, that it is correct. And that is what we talk about, critical thinking. And in Jamaica, I don't know if we have that anymore. It is a rare commodity in Jamaica, critical thinking and critical analysis. It's a rare commodity in Jamaica. And I don't know how the university professors there even teach. How do they get their children, their students, to write a decent paper? If what I'm seeing coming out of Jamaica from people with pedigrees, right? They have all their pedigrees, they're doctors and doctorates, and they have their masters, and they, right? And they're doctor this and doctor that. Okay? And yet the analysis is so below standard. Okay? Now, when we talk about debt, I want to contextualize it here in terms of where we are. Whenever we talk about debt, we know we're talking about the IMF and the World Bank, because these are the two global institutions that are the tax collectors, if you will. Right? They're there to collect our debt because, according to them, we have racked up our debt, and they have to come to put us, to discipline us, and to show us that we're children and we need to spend our monies wisely. We need to be more economical. But where does this money go? All of the surplus and all of this, trying to help us to, do you think that these guys are philanthropists and they're really there as adults to teach Jamaicans how to lower their debt and to take care of their debt? Do you think they really are doing that? Or do you think that there is an agenda behind what they're doing? Do you think that instead of helping us, they might be destroying us? And I want to read for you here an interview, well, part of an interview that was done with Professor Michael Hudson, who is a professor of economics. I think now he's a retired professor of economics in the United States. And let us look at some of the assertions, which backed up by intellectual thought, because Dr. Hudson is an intellectual, right? A true intellectual. And if you want to know, go and read his books on debt and debt repayment. Go and read those books. You'll find them to be extremely beneficial and informative. But let us go there. Am I there on it? Yes, I think this is where I want to go. Let us look at what he's saying. I want to share my screen. I think that I might have come off the part of the interview that I wanted to highlight. But let's get there and see where we can begin. I think, yes, right. This is where I wanted to start from. And finally, when we talk about public debt, look at what you see, or sovereign debt, we have to talk about the IMF and the World Bank. The bailiffs of Western financial capital, when they shed crocodile tears about the welfare losses caused by debt repayment, which divert money away from healthcare or education or clean water in the developing world, they do that on the one hand. And on the other hand, they impose the most draconian repayment terms, ensuring massive reverse capital flows, that is to say, capital flowing not from rich country to poor countries as it's supposed to do in economics textbooks, but on the contrary, from poor countries to rich countries. So when you think that, and you will hear Americans saying to you, for example, that they've given Jamaicans or other third world countries lots of aid. It's not true, right? That is according to textbook knowledge. The monies are really flowing from the third world countries into the first world countries. That is why they're first world countries, right? That is why they are first world countries. And that is why they will hold us forever in debt. We will forever be indebted to them. Okay, I remember having a conversation when I was a lecturer at the university, at Howard University, and I was having a conversation with one of my professors, with one of my colleagues, former colleagues, and he was from Trinidad, and we were talking about what was happening in the States and what they were doing. And I said, why are we complaining about what is happening in the States? And why not go back home to our countries if we don't like what they're doing in the US? And he said to me, I'm not going back because they have stolen from me, from my country, a lot of things. So I am here to get back what they've stolen. Right? And I found that comment to be an interesting comment. But to a large extent, there is some truth to what he said. They have stolen a lot of our wealth, and it smacks of the day of slavery. The wealth from Jamaica, Jamaica was one of the wealthiest colonies in the British Empire. Yet, the wealth did not go to the people, to the slaves, to the country, and to its development. It went to Europe, it went to England specifically, and to her national development. So the same thing is happening. Similarly, the same thing is happening in our world today. At the same time, they demonstrate the tenderest of mercies for the debt of friendly countries like Ukraine. It is no wonder that there is a novel campaign marking the 80th anniversary of these two vampire institutions, calling for their abolition. Vampire, what a strong word to use. The only good news is that they're becoming less and less effective and less important, chiefly because of the rise of China as a major creditor. But that is not true, because they're using Jamaica as the poster child for economic success when we are behind. You only have to go to the different Caribbean countries and see that Jamaica is way behind in terms of development. So this is the background to what we are going to talk about today. And listen to what he's going to say about the Ukraine. And listen, hold your seatbelts tight and begin to understand and to perceive what they're suggesting here about the Ukraine and what the IMF has done in Ukraine. And Michael, you've done an enormous amount of work. I know you've been following the debt of Ukraine going back to 2014, if not earlier. So why don't you start us off by talking about the debt of Ukraine and how the IMF has been dealing with it? And this is what Michael Hudson has to say. Well, the current Ukrainian debt tangle shows what a double standard there is for the IMF. And in fact, the whole international bond community when it comes to treating countries that can't pay their debt and are in similar debt straits. 2 years ago, when the fighting with Russia began, when Russia had to intervene because the Russian-speaking areas of Ukraine were under civil attack, it was obvious that Ukraine wouldn't pay the debt. And this was provoked. It was a provoked war by Washington, by the way. They wanted Ukraine to provoke Russia, so Russia would be engaged in a war, and that would weaken Russia, and then they would be able to eventually defeat Russia. And they're doing that to multiple countries at the moment, including Iran, as we're seeing happening right now. So the international bondholders that had debt falling due then said, right, okay, you don't have to pay us now. We know that you're at war. Let's put it off for 2 years and let's wait until August 1st, 2024. Well, that's exactly where we are now. So that was from 2022, and now they're saying we'll wait for the payments in 2024. And 2024 has passed, and the war continues, right? 2 years ago, they said the war will certainly be over by then. The IMF and the United States said Ukraine is going to beat Russia. So they set and make projections that they're not certain about. They just speculate. And then they get you into further debt trap, right? And for all we know, we'll march into Russia, but there won't be a war. Ukraine can pay back then. So everybody said, okay, well, wait, you'll just keep accruing interest to us. Well, you can imagine what happened a month ago as the payment time came due. What was Ukraine going to do? And obviously, Ukraine didn't have the money, and the bondholders had a choice. Either they could insist on being paid and say, you're in default, we're going to list you in default, or if you can't pay us, that means that the IMF, according to the rules, which it doesn't follow, but according to the rules, if people did follow them, that it's not permitted to lend to countries that are in default against private creditors. That's because the IMF is a policeman acting as a lobbyist for the private creditors, forcing bonds to be paid. And that is why they went down there when Golding was having problems with them, when he was telling them that he was not going to impose the austerity, the level of austerity that they were trying to have him impose on Jamaicans in 2009, 10, thereabout. All right? And they created this, along with the United States State Department, this chaos with Dodo Sandy went down there and they were able to restructure and then imposed the most austere program in the history of the IMF on Jamaica. And our politicians could do nothing. Our politicians in Jamaica, PNP and JLP, were powerless. Okay? And so the leading bondholder, so this is a private institution, this is not public, well, you know, and it's working on behalf of private capitalist interest. And so the leading bondholders, we're talking about people, the biggest bond funds, PIMCO Bond Fund, Blackstone, got together, and they had a choice. What they did was something very remarkable. They actually said, okay, Ukraine, not only do you not have to pay the debt that's falling due now, but you can write down the debt by about 39% because we know that you can't pay. Just promise to pay us beginning in a few years more than now when we know that you will have defeated Russia and can afford to pay. Again, another speculation, you know, on the condition that they are going to defeat Russia when they know that they perhaps are not. And they actually took a very large loss on what had become Ukrainian junk bonds. But let us look at now how they are going to solve that loss. Can they never lose? Well, what surprised me is not what normal international bankers did, sort of awkward thing to say. It was open to them to say, no, we're going to foreclose. And they would have understood that the US government and the IMF would have done everything they could to prevent a default by Ukraine. And they would have bailed out Ukraine, but somehow the US government twisted the bond holders. We have no idea why, but the bondholders did something that is very uncharacteristic in taking the loss on the 50 billion loan that was falling due. Now, this was under Trump, not under Trump, under Biden. Okay? This would have now been under Biden. So when we think that Trump is the only one who is transactional, the US empire, the IMF, and all of these institutions, Wall Street, they are also transactional. As we suggested, Trump is the symptom of the problems that the US empire faces. He's not the root cause by any stretch of the imagination. We have no idea why, but the bondholders did something that is very uncharacteristic. I read it already. So the IMF explained that since the West no longer lives by the rule of law, but by the rule-based order. So the rule-based order is not the rule of law. Everything can go ahead. In fact, I think the rule-based order is a code word for militarism. Militarism and imperialism. You've got to understand that. Well, we already know that one of the other articles of agreement of the IMF says that it's not allowed to make a loan to a country in war. Why do they not allow that? Because they know that they're going to lose. But let us look at what's going to happen here. The IMF said, and I'm paraphrasing, well, if the country is going to war for a purpose that the United States and NATO support, of course, since we are the arms of NATO, basically, and the US Defense Department and State Department, of course, we can waive the rules. Okay, so when you're waging the war on behalf of the US or NATO, yeah, you can do that. But other nations, you won't be able to do that. The rules are meant only for when we want to apply them against recalcitrant countries that have difficulty paying the debt. Bear with me because I'm making a very important point here, or a few important points, I should say. So they just made new loans to Ukraine to enable it to keep fighting the war. Because that's what it's about, war and profit, including the IMF and all these institutions and the World Bank are involved in the war machine. And the bondholders all pretended that somehow Ukraine isn't going to lose, that somehow they're going to come out solvent and pay the bondholders. And if we think about the war in Iraq and all these wars that they say that they're going to win, and they win it from their perspective because they're making lots of money, but the people are losing. Okay? In the same way, Jamaicans, you're losing when you think that you're paying down your debt and you're just giving up your money to bondholders. Nobody has any idea of what actually convinced them. But of course, since Blackstone and PIMCO are very close to the US State Department, there must have been a discussion, arm twisting, and some kind of off-the-books promise that don't worry, we'll take care of you. So often what we see with our eyes is not or are not the real deal. Okay? We have to understand that. Lots of other things happening off the books, and they're just telling you what you want to hear. And apparently there are two plans that are set up for how Ukraine can pay the debts. Blackstone and JP Morgan are working together to organize what they say will be a bonanza of selling off Ukrainian resources once the war is over. So if you think that they're going to lose, and they said when it apparently seemed as if, oh, they're losing, no, you have to sell off your resources. And they think that this is going to be a huge market for American companies. European companies to buy Ukrainian land, Ukrainian public utilities, and any assets they have. And when you saw that big drama between Trump and Zelensky, that is what they were debating. Right? So that is what they were debating. How much of the natural resources would be given over to American companies? It wasn't about peace. You think it was about peace, but it wasn't. It was all an act to make you believe that one is a warmonger and one is a peace-making guy. Okay? So, if Ukraine wins the military war, we know that won't happen. But if they did, then they'll cease to be a country that owns its own resources. Anyway, it'll end up looking sort of like Argentina or other countries like Jamaica. He didn't have it here, but like Jamaica, that are told, pay your debts by selling off your land, selling off your mineral rights. Right? So if we find any oil in Jamaica, if we find any gold in Jamaica, it does not belong to us. Because these are the rights that we would have signed off. And your prime minister or ministers of government would have been complicit in these deals. Okay? And that is why I'm suggesting it doesn't matter who wins, because they are beholden to the corporate structure in the world. And they get their monies, they get their cutbacks, they get their cut. Okay. And Ukraine has minerals, a lot of minerals, don't they? All in the Russian-speaking areas. Wow. And that is why the Ukraine attacked, to provoke Russia. Okay? Lithium and others. And the illusion is that somehow that all this money that will be paid to the Ukrainian government for buying out its assets will be used by the government to pay the bondholders and remain solvent. Wow, what a level of deception. And we hear about surplus. Just pay down your debt and have all the surplus, and you can use the surplus to build your economy. And that is a bunch of nonsense. If there's any surplus, it doesn't remain in Jamaica. Okay? That's basically the IMF strategy for the last 50 years. If Latin American countries or African countries can't pay their debts and have to borrow from the IMF, they have to sell off their mineral rights and their lands and the others. All right? You got it? Do you understand the profundity of Michael Hudson's statements there? Do you understand? And Michael Hudson, by the way, is no economic professor of any mean standard, of any mean order. He is one of America's finest economists. And I would say a global economist, well-renowned also in China and other parts of the world. And his book, Super Imperialism, you really have to get some neurons in your brain. As much as I like to read, it really challenges my intellect when I read his book on super imperialism. It's worth reading, but it's a lot of dense material, heavy stuff that you have to think. Okay? And he has written many books on debt. So if there's anyone who knows about debt, is Michael Hudson. And one of the things I like about him, he also has explored how debt was treated by the Jews during the time when they were a theocracy, during the Old Testament scriptures. And that's very interesting if you read the book of Deuteronomy and the book of Leviticus, but particularly the book of Deuteronomy, Numbers. You'll see how God taught his people how to deal with debt. And many of the nations that surrounded them learned some of their practices, the Jewish practices, right? Which enabled them to have been a thriving society. We can't live in this parasitical society in which the rich continues to suck the blood of the poor. We're leading to a revolution in which the entire country or countries will be destroyed. And that's what we're seeing. The black rocks and the black stones and all these bond holding companies and private enterprises. They are parasitical. The IMF, as the article suggests, is a vampire institution. So when Andrew Holness is suggesting that the debt has gone down, we know that it's gone down not for the benefit of the people. And our resources have been sold out. So no amount of oil exploration, gas exploration, gold exploration is going to redound in the interest of the Jamaican people, because our resources have been sold out to private bond holders who are, by the way, not sympathetic with the plight of Jamaicans. So Jamaicans have to really contextualize whether or not the Prime Minister, in his pronunciations, right, whether or not he's speaking the truth, whether or not he has done a fantastic job, an amazing job, as he is there asserting. You will have to determine that. I'm not going to determine that for you. I'm just here to educate you, to contextualize everything, and to let you know that we operate, the Jamaican economy operates within a global rules-based, not a community that is based on law and order, right? Or the rule of law. It is based on, it's a rules-based system, which is based on militarism and imperialism, which means it's going to extract everything if you give them the permission to extract. And at the moment, Jamaicans believe so much in the system because we want to party and enjoy ourselves, and only if we could leave the problem on Andrew Holness and weigh the burden on him and say, let him take care of the economy. And because he tells me, yeah, let me go into the party and jump and do, yeah, boom, you jump in your club. And you expect that Andrew Holness is going to solve all these problems, and you have nothing in your brain to understand that he can't. Even if he wanted to, he can't. And even if I should get there tomorrow and become Prime Minister of Jamaica, I couldn't, unless God steps over them and undo what they are doing. And he's able to do that. But the fact of the matter is that Jamaicans are so wicked. We have such a wicked heart that our current situation is reflective of our hearts. The judgment that we're seeing, the Bible says, if my people who are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face, then I'll turn around and heal their land. And our land needs healing. And the remarks, the commentary, the responses I see on my videos suggest that our people are hurting, suggest that our people are polarized, suggest that our people are aggressive and angry. And if the government fails to let them know the truth, even though the truth is uncomfortable, it's unpalatable. Ladies and gentlemen, when I learned a lot about the IMF years ago, maybe 20 years ago, I was disappointed to know that we in Jamaica have spent a lot of our lives, even back then when I was studying about the IMF, thinking that this institution was there to lift us up and so that we can tread on a better path. And its main quest is to kill, to steal, and to destroy. Okay? So, I don't know what Jamaica Dr. Andrew Holness is living in. And sometimes I wish I could just place myself in this sort of delusional world as many Jamaicans are living in. I wish sometimes I could do it. But I can't. My job is to educate, to inform, so that you will be able to make wise and intelligent decisions. Okay, so that's what I want to share with you. Do you think Dr. Andrew Holness has done a fantastic job? Superficially, it looks so, but if you understand the realities of geopolitics, it's a resounding no, he hasn't. And can we blame him? I don't think we can. But what we think we should blame him for doing or not doing is to let us know the truth. The government of Jamaica, both on the PNP and the JLP side, need to level up with Jamaicans now and let them know that truthfully, this is our plight. And we need to sit down and see how we're going to move forward. Because we have vampires, parasites, about to suck the very economic life out of Jamaicans. Thank you so much for joining. I hope that you'd like, share, and subscribe. Like the video so the videos can be shared with as many people on the platform. Thank you very much for subscribing and for all of you who have sent your intelligent and thoughtful comments. I look forward to continuing this sojourn with you. All the best. See you in another one. Ciao.